Hello, everyone. Welcome to the IntraCultural podcast. I'm Missy.
And I'm Lucy, and we're two anthropologists who co founded a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging firm called Willing Observers.
So, the IntraCultural podcast covers a range of topics and answers common questions that can be better understood using the concept of culture. And the IntraCultural podcast is sponsored by us.
We do a certificate and a certification. So if you're interested in learning more and become more proficient in DEIB, whether that's to help you in your career development or in your current profession, it's a really updated course where we're talking about and applying all the changes of DEI landscape into the program. And essentially, the goal is that by the end, you'll get a certificate or a certification so you can learn how to create more inclusive cultures in your department, organization, university, you name it. And the main difference between the two programs is that one of them is gives you the foundations and the concepts, and the other one we help you develop your own strategic plan. And there's additional more resources in a toolkit that comes with that. So if you're in a DEI professional space or you are seeking to enter into a world, or if your DEI department is suddenly made to belong in HR, wherever you may be, this culture strategy program might be for you. And we give some really awesome Credly badges that you can use to promote your new skills on LinkedIn or on your email signature line.
And we also have a Trump special, which is really useful. So, if for any reason you have lost your job or you need to reskill or upskill due to the federal cuts and different kinds of, I don't know, can I say on this podcast? And different kinds of right, that have come out of these changes in anti-DEI laws, then you get a discount for enrolling in the program.
I thought we were saying some other word last time. No,
Oh, I'm not allowed to say that.
I have no idea, but I don't know.
Okay, beat me, or we'll put like a warning on it. Like if you have children, don't listen to Missy speak.
Mm. So please sign up. If you have any questions, reach out to us, etc.
So, Lucy, what's going on?
What's going on? I was just telling Missy that I have been spending way too much money on fancy tea and boba outside, so I've been making my own. It's right here. It's really nice. And I am doing a new self-care app, and one of my goals in there is limit sugary drinks. So I have to decide between that goal and do something that makes you happy. I feel like I have to choose between one of those two goals. And I have not made the decision on it.
No, I don't. I'm not. There's no limiting right now. I don't make, I haven't started. I usually make cold brew at home, but I I've been too busy to make cold brew, which is very sad. But Eric has started, so Eric is my partner. Eric has started making pudding. He started making vegan pudding. That has been my treat in the last week, and he makes it out of silken tofu.
That sounds so delicious. I think I saw an Instagram video for chocolate pudding made out of silken tofu. Next time I'm in your house, though, I'm gonna have to request that be on the menu.
That you need to. So far, he has made chocolate, butterscotch, pistachio, vanilla, banana, and our next attempt is coconut. But they all like, and then he puts them in these little cups. So I'm like a 5-year-old. I'm like, Lunchables and pudding cups, please.
That's amazing. I'm so envious. I should make a note on my virtual background. This is not my house. I am at my friend's house, and I'm pretty sure she would not like her home on a YouTube video. So hence the virtual background. I did not ask for permission either. She might like her home in a virtual background as on YouTube, but I'm gonna go with no.
And if you are listening to this on on Spotify, then you need to go to YouTube and now check out the background. No, let's not describe it. Now you're gonna have to go to YouTube and see it. It's like an Easter egg.
I gave Missy 5 or 6 different options. This one was the one she chose. So without further ado, we're gonna get started on the topic of this episode. And on this episode, we're going to talk everything related to Title IX, especially because I know the last several episodes we have focused on Trump's anti-DEI executive orders, but we haven't really highlighted the fact that one key aspect of DEI that's also been under attack through a whole different set of executive orders have to do on the attack of gender and specifically transgender individuals in the United States. So here we have an expert, Dr. Missy Maseko, to really enlighten us with all anything related sex, gender, transgender advocacy. And I know I will have tons of questions. So if you are listening to this and you have more questions, please feel free to send us a message and we're happy to incorporate them into future podcast episodes.
So we're gonna I'll try to not make it a lecture, right? But we're gonna try to just talk a little bit about what's going on with the attack on higher ed around Title IX. Like, what is Title IX? What's like, how is this part of the larger kind of umbrella of anti-DEI? And the larger umbrella of the attack on higher ed, pulling federal funding. And a lot of this is about the interpretation of Title IX based on the definition of sex. So let's just walk it back. If like you don't know what Title IX is, right? So we've got, the Rights Act of 1964. What Lucy and I talk a lot about is Title VII. Title VII is the provision under the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that protects from employment discrimination and protects from employment discrimination in a number of ways based on protected classes and categories that were originally laid out in the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and then were expanded upon over the years through different kinds of legal challenges. So then in 1972, Title IX came into being as kind of an extension of that under the Higher Education Act. And Title IX on protects from sex discrimination explicitly in education. So that is Title IX. Yay.
Mhm.
Any questions?
Well, one of the things that I knew from Title IX is that it originally started because women and men sport teams were funded differently. And back in the day before the 1972, a lot of the money that universities received for sports would almost exclusively go to the male sports teams. And so this Title IX, when it was implemented, said you had to give like similar funding for women's sports teams as well. And so that's my minimal knowledge about Title IX is that it sought to create equal kind of opportunities across gender in higher education system. So then it said you couldn't discriminate based on sex for anything that had to do with education programs, like any kind of scholarships, any kind of sports funding, anything that receives federal funding needs to be distributed fairly, equitably across sex. And they use the word sex. I'm not trying to replace it with gender because it was sex based, right?
Yeah, and we're gonna unpack that a little in a minute. But yes, so Title IX covers that kind of equal funding and equal opportunity. And so Title IX ends up getting associated with sports a lot, but as you said, Lucy, it means like funding for different programs. It also covers sex-based harassment. And I say sex-based rather than sexual harassment in part because of what we're going to talk about. So it used to cover only sexual harassment, but in the recent past, that's been changed to sex-based harassment because that kind of harassment does not create equal opportunities for participation in education. If somebody is in a toxic, horrible environment where they are unable to actually participate fully.
Can you give us a difference between sexual harassment and sex-based? Like, what are be two examples?
So historically, Title IX has covered sexual harassment, which is usually about, right, desire, right? That can be, different kinds of stalking, right? Or usually thinking about binary gender, harassment that is sexual in nature. Um, advances, asking for a date, right? Asking for, I know we're using the word sex a lot, but asking for, right? In this case, like physical contact that is intimate. Um,
Mhm.
where sex-based harassment is a shift that happened only in the last couple years, and that's reconceptualizing harassment as something that's anything that's based on your sex slash gender. So that is a much broader understanding of harassment because that can be that can be anything, and that can focus on sexual orientation, transgender status, pregnancy, right? And any types of discrimination or harassment that are based on any of that, not just those kinds of sexual advances.
So then, and if you are listening to this, you might wonder, well, what counts as harassment and what counts as sex? What counts as gender? All of these categories are things that are contested, right? So if like I were to file a complaint, they would contest all of these categories. Are you being harassed? What counts as harassment? Is it because of your gender or is it because of your sex? What counts as that? So that's part of what makes the implementation of Title IX so tricky and historically has always been tricky.
Yes, very tricky. And you know, I can go into the weeds, but y'all might fall asleep. So let's go with like the first big kind of thing that to understand Title IX and all the fights. And part of what's happening now with the federal government is understanding the category sex, right? Because we're using sex and sex-based harassment. So, how are we thinking about and defining sex? How is it defined legally? I think that's the first jumping off point. And then if you really want me to, I can take a deep dive into what counts as harassment according to different interpretations.
Well, I just got my caffeine and I did jumping jacks before this, so I'm awake. Uh, okay, so I guess we should talk about what was counting sex and gender before the new executive orders and what does it count as now?
hmm Well, I think so. This is like, right. This is a very sexy episode because we're talking about sex, right? But like, I know, so funny.
I'm shaking my head.
Okay. Um, so like if we're talking about social categories, right, and we're talking about sex, I usually refer to sex, gender, sexuality with kind of a slash in between because we tend to lump those three categories together in the way that we talk about and think about how we categorize people and how we categorize humans. So I think in like the if you are taught this in school, which I don't think I ever was, but if you are taught this in school, you usually associate, right, sex with biological kind of potentials and how you are assigned, right, a sex at birth often. And gender is usually thought of as social categorizations about how you behave. That's way more complicated. Those actually aren't separate because how we think about gender impacts how we think about sex. And who we love and desire and who we're attracted to, sexual orientation or sexual identity. Um, that is also part of how we think about gender and how we think about biological potential.
Okay. And before we go deeper into that, I just want to frame the context and why we're bringing this up and why we're talking about this. So, we talked about the anti DEI executive orders, but also on January 20th, Trump signed the Defending Women from Gender Ideology Extremism and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government. That is really wordy and incendiary language that's basically like claiming that women have been under attack by the left due to this gender ideology that says what you just said, that like there is a difference between sex and gender and sexual orientation. And so the Trump administration claims that there shouldn't be or isn't any difference between sex and gender, that there's two of them, that there's only men and women that correspond to male and female. And that runs counter to all the research that has been done on sex and gender for decades. Because for decades, we have known both from the social scientists and from the biologists that it's a lot more complicated than that. So the scientific community agrees that that is incorrect. What Trump, the administration says, is incorrect, that sex and gender are separate and that there's more than two sexes and then there's more than two genders and that those things might not align.
Yep. Yep. And this is a long standing, I mean, this is a long standing debate about how you assign sex to human bodies. And the example that I always give is one that actually really applies to Title IX, and that is sports. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I am a sports fanatic. And um, if you look at the history of kind of quote unquote modern sports since the 1800s, when professional sports, the Olympics started incorporating women, then there were gender segregated sports teams and events. And but at the point where women were integrated into like the modern Olympic Games, there started to be a fight over how we actually determine if this person is a woman and this person is a man based on, right, the assigning of sex to human bodies. It is so complex that over the entire history, it has been a fight about how we actually assign biological like sex to human bodies because it's so complex. It is so complex.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you can't just tell that by looking at someone,
Right.
which is purportedly what people want to do with the bathroom bills.
Oh, the
That and this, so again, like, it matters. Why does this executive order matters? It matters because for the last 10 years or so there's been advocacy from progressive movements to say that you should not be afraid to use the bathroom, right, when you go, that from if you were visible gender does not match what you actually are inside, that you should not be afraid to use the bathroom, that your identifications should match your identity, right? So that you shouldn't have to just be forced to pick between male and female, that you should be able to use your name that you choose and the pronouns that you choose. And so a lot of these gains that the progressives has done and DEI has gained in terms of gender inclusion are being challenged by the Trump administration to the extent that, so this executive order attempts to force state policies to reverse more inclusive practices that they have implemented.
Yep. And there's a whole series of state level, they're called Save Women's Sports bills. And they are they are specifically attacking the transgender community. And they are trying to eliminate and this is really important to notice. They are seeking to eliminate trans women and girls from sports, which is also, right, part of they're trying to lump it into Title IX and saying like we're doing this for women, right? Which in essence eliminates or suggests that trans women like aren't part of women, like which is ridiculous. Um, but it they these bills are awful, awful, right? They're from like they start at like first grade, right? And then they want to like subject little kids and like preteens and teenagers to invasive sex testing, like hormone testing and pelvic exams and the whole thing. If anybody challenges that, like, oh, well, this young girl doesn't look feminine enough, and so we need to make sure that she fits into the category of, you know, this sports team to like play water polo. I mean, it's just it's absolutely ridiculous and so invasive. But they're doing it in the name of Title IX.
And you bring up a really good point that I have heard many times and I absolutely believe is that a lot of the implementation of these laws and regulations is going to affect everybody, not just people who are transgender. Like it's policing of everybody's gender and medical history and health, etc. Like to your point, like little children, boys and girls, and everyone, just general kids would be subjected to all these invasive medical tests just because there is a fear that one transgender child is going to go into a sport that they should not be in.
Right, which is like
So
ridiculous and silly, and it is more directly focused on women and girls, which in itself is, right, telling, right?
mm,
That like it's like, well, we don't care if like the trans boys and the trans men are in sports. We only care if there are trans women and girls in sports. But but it doesn't,
that's mm,
yeah, it's misogynistic. It's just it's more policing of women and girls' bodies. And all of this for like the estimated population of trans people in the United States is an estimate, because we don't have census data, between 0.5 and 2% of the entire US population right now is the average. Hey, like the attack on trans athletes in Maine, which I'll, talk about a little bit. Like, so the Trump administration threatened to like defund Maine, right? To defund like,
the
kids,
state.
yeah, and like kids food programs in Maine, because Maine had two trans athletes, two trans women on sports teams. And like this is indicative of this entire attack. It's like a very small and marginalized population already, but all of this energy, there's over 400 bills that have been proposed this year at the state level attacking trans people and largely focused on trans women and girls.
This is wild. I do think we should talk about this because we do have probably people who are listening who are really conservative Christian, namely some Baptist or other Christian denominations who feel really strongly against the bathroom, um, the pro transgender inclusive bathrooms.
Hmm. Yes. Well, the first thing I usually say when people say like, "Oh, what about these gender neutral restrooms?" I will tell you about one of my favorite exchanges that I've ever had on this one. Was one of the places that I love to go in California is the Huntington Museum and Gardens. It is a fantastic place. They have great libraries, they've got beautiful gardens. And they every place that they've renovated, they now have gender neutral restrooms. So I was in the restroom, and I know, Lucy, you and I have talked about this before, like because of, if you're just listening to this and you're not watching it, like I am very white and I have blonde hair and I have blue eyes. And for whatever reason, that means that every white person that has really deep, right, bigoted feelings decides that they can come talk to me and say absolutely horrible things as if I'm going to agree with them. Which
Yeah, this is Missy's lifelong struggle.
So I'm in the Huntington, and the assumption is also clearly that I am cisgender and heterosexual. And this older white woman walks up to me in the bathroom and says, "Oh, I just can't believe that this is a gender neutral restroom. I feel it's like this is awful. I can't believe all this." And I was like, "Oh, really?" I was like, "Oh, that's too bad. I have a gender neutral restroom in my home." And like she did not know what to say to me, right? But like every person that has this like deep-seated feeling about gender neutral restrooms, I'm like, are your restrooms gender segregated in your house? Like they're not. Please
No.
stop.
But they also wouldn't invite people who are transgender to their knowledge, right?
To
That's
their
to
knowledge.
their knowledge. Uh, and how are you making your family members feel if let's say your kids, your nieces, nephews, etc., were to be transgender?
Right.
Are you
Right.
gonna not allow them to use your bathroom anymore?
Right. Transgender, non-binary, like intersex, like all of these are categories that are more descriptive of what does there's a really great scholar that does work on gender and sex, and when talking about sex assignment to human bodies and gender, she calls sex assignment. She said that a lot of people think about even like binary sex. They think that they're progressive if they have it on a continuum, right? That you go somehow from, it's like continuum from female to male or male to female. And she's like, no, she's like, it's more like points in a multi-dimensional space. That's how we should think about the science of assigning sex to human bodies and like how we really think about what gender is. It's like it's not a continuum from point A to point B. It's not linear. It doesn't go back and forth. Like
Mm.
humans are so amazing and complex and diverse that like that's so limiting to just to even have a continuum.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of the continuum models come from Western science, ideas of progress, right? Like anytime we have like get from point A to point B, you think linearly because we're in the West. But to the point on gender, there's so many cultures around the world that don't have binary genders. And so, and for example, Native Americans, even in the United States, and which is considered the West, it's really common among some Native American populations to have a third gender as regularly part of their system. And those third genders are revered and seen as more spiritual
Mhm.
or spiritual individuals because they cross the boundaries of what's considered traditional men and women, and they're seen in a positive light, and they're seen as sometimes even going into like their high priestesses roles in those communities or or priest roles.
Mhm. Yeah.
And one of the things I wanted to highlight on this is because I have met, through the more than so decade that I've been doing DEI work and DEI trainings, I have met really well-intentioned people who are very Christian, who have modesty values and are generally like just terrified. And to those individuals, I want to say, what exactly are you afraid of? What exactly are you afraid of? Because you are in a majority group. And this is where where we need to ask everyone who is doing DEI work, who cares about DEI, this is where their growth opportunity exists, right? If something makes you so uncomfortable as someone in the majority group, that's something you need to really do some reflection on. Because similar to your point, Missy, you are a white woman. For a long time, probably conversations about race and you as a white person made you uncomfortable, right?
Mhm.
And that's the work that you had to do. Even for me, I'm heterosexual. And I did not really grow up with people in my family being openly accepting of individuals that are gay, even though there are a lot of gay individuals in my family and my mom's side of the family. It was more of like whisper, so and so is this, and so is that, right? And then as we're growing up and getting older, and we realize that we have to be the generation that educates our parents how to be more inclusive of people who are gay. And that is a personal journey of dismantling your privileges as being in the majority in order to do the allyship work for someone in a minority group. And I want to just keep re-emphasizing that because yes, we care that you have values and that your values are around modesty. But if you're going to be an ally to marginalized populations, that's really going to be your internal work that you do to dismantle that internalized misogyny and internalized homophobia that comes from religious beliefs.
Yeah. And they're embedding then in our larger, like binary gender is so embedded in our larger cultural system that it really takes a lot of work
Mm-hmm.
to undo that. And so I guess let's just lay out these
Yeah.
definitions one more time, right? So sex is the way that we would say, there are some researchers that call it gendered biology, right? Because we're so socialized into this idea of binary gender, men and women, that then when we attempt to really look at the biology of human systems, that we tend to then take our own ideas about binary gender and reinscribe them on how we do the scientific work. But sex is kind of how we think about human bodies and assigning sex to human bodies. Gender is not just social, right, or what we're socialized into thinking. We can think about gender identity, which is your internal sense of being around gender, and then gender expression, which is externally, right, how you display gender to the world. And that is in terms of your body, your hair, the way you dress, the way you walk, the way you move through the world. Sexual identity or sexual orientation are patterns of desire that are usually that map onto these ideas about binary sex and binary gender. And so all of it, right, that's why we say sex, gender, sexuality, because all of it kind of circulates around our own perceptions of what gender is. And then that structures the way that we're attracted to people, and that can influence the way that we actually conduct the science of assigning sex to human bodies.
Mm-hmm. And I want to say that there was a point in time where we thought sex was just XX and XY. And that's what still a lot of people believe. But the science has shown that that is not the only sex chromosome. The only chromosomes that determine sex, period. And two, the only categories that we have to understand sex.
Yep.
So I think our video team is going to be able to edit this image in here. But I found this really insightful from the Scientific American. And it's like the Scientific American published this a few years ago, and it just gives you a flow chart of all the possible configurations of the sex and sex chromosomes that possibly could exist and how that shifted and how leads to different physiological results in your body. And so you have here literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, over 12 possible genetic configurations that lead to over 12 possible physiological responses that then get forced into two groups, the male and female. Like,
Yep.
this is what we mean when we say sex is socially constructed.
Hmm.
Because even though there is a biology behind it, we still force these categories. We're the ones that create the categories. The categories are not self made. Scientists sit here and think about how do we group these things in a way that makes sense to organize our society. And now we have tons of research that says sex is really diverse and really complicated. And the fact that the Trump administration is calling two sexes as biological truth is just incorrect. Like, you should stop using the word truth, like, period, Trump. Like, stop using the word truth. It makes no sense when we're actually looking at the research and the evidence. It's
Yeah.
just like national gaslighting, you know?
Yeah, it does not adhere to the science of anything. Um, but so that's the baseline, right? And that's the baseline where all of these kinds of orders are coming from and the laws, the Save Women's Sports bills that are happening at the state level, the resurgence of bathroom bills. There's a big case in front of the Supreme Court right now that was initiated before Trump, and that's because this state level action has been ongoing for the past several years. And that's the Scrimeti case. And by the time you listen to this, it might be decided and we'll have to do an addendum. But that case is about the attempt to ban gender affirming care for young people. So this is a very kind of tense time for all of this. Now, should we circle back to Title IX then?
Oh, yeah. Now that we all are on the same page, let's go back to Title IX.
All right. So, with all of this kind of challenges to, there's this, you know, the social kinds of understandings and the scientific understandings of sex, gender, sexuality. And then there's this whole other thing, which is the legal definitions of sex. So I told you this podcast was going to be sexy all
No, please
around
stop. Please stop. I'm just kidding. I love puns. No, puns bring me joy.
So, the legal definitions of sex, are based on that kind of collapsing of the sex, gender, sexuality. And the legal definitions really started at the point where you're really collapsing sex and gender, right? The belief that somehow this biological essentialism of, right, male, female maps on to men, women very easily. It gets inscribed in some ways in the anti-discrimination laws that come out of the Civil Rights Act and then, right, out of Title IX. And I just want to say, like, this is not in any way to say that we don't need, because of these larger social systems, we do need discrimination protections that are based on gender because the belief in binary gender and that you have kind of a hierarchy of masculinity is somehow better than femininity has created misogynistic systems. So none of what we're saying is to claim that we don't need discrimination protections, but just to trace kind of the legal history of how that collapsing has been embedded in the law itself, right, in terms of the definition of sex.
Mhm.
So early definitions of sex, collapsing of that kind of, right, sex and gender, and it was really embedded in workplace discrimination. Um, Title IX expands it to higher education. And then over time, through legal suits, the definition of sex discrimination, because sex is the word that's in the law, right? It says you cannot discriminate because of sex, right?
Mhm.
But that's meant to encompass sex and gender in the 1960s and 1970s. Pregnancy discrimination becomes part of sex-based discrimination in the 1970s into the 1980s. And then in the late 1980s, sex and gender stereotyping becomes part of discrimination protections. So when you stereotype someone as too masculine, or too feminine, and then you keep them from having a job because of it, that is now illegal as of the late 1980s. And then in the early 2000s, you see that because of sex also starts to encompass what we already know, right? And that is that sexual orientation and transgender status are also part of all these ideas that we have about binary sex and binary gender, and that sex-based discrimination then encompasses discrimination based on sexual orientation and transgender status. So legally, that expands from 1964 to 2020. And in 2020, in terms of Title VII in the workplace, right, sex-based discrimination now encompasses all of that. And that gets us back to where we started, right? It goes from sexual harassment to sex-based harassment because of that expansion in Title VII. Wasn't it? Are you asleep yet? Are you okay?
No, I have a lot of questions.
Okay.
So, one, is Title IX only about higher education? Or is Title IX applicable everywhere?
No, no. Title IX is just it's in the higher education, right? It's in the Higher Education Act. So it's Ed Code. And the expansion of the understanding of sex was actually under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title
Mm-hmm.
VII. And part of the fight is we have these workplace discrimination protections now, as of 2020. But there's been a big fight over trying to get that definition of sex and sex discrimination into other places like housing discrimination and Title IX because it was a narrow Supreme Court decision that changed that.
So how are things changing now? I know you were mentioning one of the current Supreme Court decisions that hasn't come out yet, but how is Title IX being redefined by the Trump administration and the current lawsuits that are currently on the table?
Yeah, so what what ended up, I mean, the decision that expanded Title VII was the case was called Bostock, and it was decided in the summer of 2020. For all of you out there, who was president in the summer of 2020? Let's hum the Jeopardy theme. Who was it? Who was it? Who was it? It was Trump, right? So Trump was in office when Bostock was decided, and he was not happy with it. And he basically sat on it for a bit. And then Biden was elected in November. Um, and the Biden administration came in and said that they were going to, because they can, right, federally direct what the Department of Education does in terms of interpreting Title IX. But the Biden administration sat on their guidance until 2024.
Mm.
So Bostock was decided in 2020, right? Because of sex became something that encompasses all, sexual orientation and transgender status. And then the Biden administration offered no guidance until 2024 on how that might change how we think about Title IX protections. In April of 2024, they came out with guidance that it really expanded Title IX protections for pregnant and parenting students. And that was the change from sexual harassment to, right, sex-based discrimination, that protected transgender students, that protected students who were discriminated on the basis of sexual orientation under Title IX. The Biden guidance in April 2024 said nothing about sports, which
Mm.
I think was a huge cop out. But even that expansion was then challenged immediately by 26 states because it was supposed to go into effect August 1st, 2024. And in 24 states, it did. And in 26 states, it didn't because they challenged even that expansion.
I remember we did something for our newsletter subscribers. We send them an update on it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So it could have been really great, but there was a challenge that basically stopped it from going into effect last year. And then when Trump was elected, they reversed all of it back to his previous, right, education department's status of 2020. And there are some changes to the way that they handle sexual harassment too, because it goes from sex-based discrimination back to um, sexual harassment as the kind of thing that Title IX covers. But it basically walks back all of that guidance and all of those protections under Title IX to where it was in 2020 and just ignores the other kinds of Supreme Court decisions.
Mm. So I guess the question is, what can we do?
Well, if And what has happened in the interim at the state level, even before the Biden guidance in 2024, is you saw a lot of states taking the decision in Bostock that applied to workplace discrimination and incorporating it into their state level education codes.
Mm,
So that was actually like in those 24 states that were happy to take on that guidance. You probably have some aspect of this shift in the definition, in the legal definition of sex to protect against sexual orientation and transgender status discrimination somewhere in the state code. And
mhm,
so that's something that we can continue to do is at the state level, create new state level protections and reject things like the Save Women's Sports bills. In California, there was one, it was Assembly Bill 89 that was just absolutely terrible. Right. So what's happening at the state and local level, and how can you go to your school board meetings and make sure that they're adhering to state law or push back against new kinds of bans against transgender athletes or new bathroom bills. Right? What can you do at the state and local level to kind of shore up against this? Um, at the state level too, like I mentioned, Maine. Oh my goodness, if you're not following the governor of Maine, since I already swore, I'll just keep swearing. She is a badass. So uh, Trump tried to confront her in person. Did you see any of that? So she was at some type of meeting and Trump was speaking, and he brought up the case against her, and he was trying to push her in person. And she said, "Yeah, I'll see you in court."
I did hear about that. Yeah.
He was just like, "No, I'm protecting not just the trans athletes, but I'm protecting that's actually protecting, right? Women's and girls' athletics because these increases in policing of these athletes has led to usually the policing of anybody who doesn't look feminine enough.
Hmm.
And historically, that has absolutely, because ideal beauty standards tend to be white, has ended up really impacting women of color. Uh,
Hmm.
so good for the governor of Maine.
And I think it's worth reminding people here that the executive orders are not law, right? I think a lot of people see these executive orders and they get scared and then they go into compliance without needing to comply, especially because executive orders are being challenged legally for their constitutionality. Oh, I'm back on mispronouncing words again. I've done a few episodes where like nothing was mispronounced. But but these executive orders are just because they say one thing, it doesn't mean that we must abide by the executive orders immediately without questioning them. That's why we have the kind of government that we do, which separates state law from federal law. I mean, it's legal to smoke pot and buy pot in California, but federally it's not. And we live with that contradiction every day. Just be careful when you fly outside of California. So I just want to remind people that that's the moment we are living in, where all of these contradictions are coming to the surface. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we stop doing the work or stop doing the advocacy. It means we just find different ways to do it and rely on those pathways that are more protected. So it's really awesome that the Maine governor is like going to bat to maintain those protections.
Yep. And California too. California has been doing a really good job shoring up their own ed code and their Title IX protections and expanding them out. And that can happen at the state level, that can happen at the local level. And these are all just things that are working their way through the courts in and the thing that we talk about all the time, right? In workplaces and organizations, right? This, historically when there have been, federal or government challenges against the LGBTQ plus community, then you also have, right, workplaces and organizations that can create safe spaces and protections that they can actually think about sex-based harassment in a different way. And so I think that's another avenue and another place where it's not Title IX, right? It's not higher ed necessarily, but it's another place where you can see these protections being shored up and that can possibly push back against some of the chilling effect.
Yeah. And I just want to do a plug as we're, I think, getting ready to wrap up the show that you just published a trans allyship guide with the AAUW, the Association for American University Women.
Hmm.
So we're going to put that on the show notes so that you can find concrete ways to plug in and remember that when you support trans women, you support all women because that legislation, the implementation of legislation that target trans women targets all women. That's just how it works. You can't make distinctions between the two.
That is correct. And
Mm-hmm.
the guide also has a link where so there are lots of great guides. So it has links to the existing allyship guides and it all, but what it does is it answers like if you are getting hard questions that you don't know how to answer, then submit them and then we give you model responses for how you can actually talk about issues or respond to questions that you get so you can be a better ally and do the work of transgender advocacy.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I guess we should say thank you. I do not remember what time we started the podcast, so I hope we did not go on forever.
Yeah, this is a really big topic. I teach about it for like full semesters, so I hope it gave you something to chew on. And please submit questions. Thanks, everyone, and we will be back in your ears again soon.
Yeah, thank you. See you soon.